I really hope my parents don't watch this. Christopher Weston Chandler was born February 24th, 1982 to Robert Chandler and Barbara Weston Chandler. Chris's earliest memory was that of being locked in a closet by babysitters and stating that this gave him autism. This event would lead him to being mute for almost 6 years. In 1987, he attended Greene County Primary School, where he would eventually leave in 1990 to attend Nathaniel Greene Elementary School. It's here he would allege that he was abused by several of the staff members, and they would record his suffering. Unknown if true, because Chris isn't exactly the most reliable narrator, he'd be pulled out of the elementary school and be homeschooled. In 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog would be released. This event would be significant as it began his lifelong obsession with the franchise. In 1992, he would change his name from Christopher to Christian, as a bear animatronic at a mall mistakenly called him Christian. Chris, thinking that the literal will of God was speaking through the bear, he would go on later on and change his name to Christian. In 93, he would go to Providence Middle School and would win the Sonic the Hedgehog Watch and Win sweepstakes. This is a pivotal event in Christory. This would also be one of the first of many media appearances by Christian. In 96, Chris would begin Manchester High School, where he claimed he had the best years of his life. It was around this time that he would also create his first original character, Do Not Steal, named Bionic after being hit in the head with a basketball. Although it is basically just a Sonic the Hedgehog palette swap ripoff, an omen of things to come. It was also around this time that Pokemon would come to America, beginning another lifelong obsession that would change the face of Christory once again forever. In 1999, Chris would create a website for Pokemon called the CWC Pokesite. This is unfortunately lost to time. This was a school project and would be the first of baby steps at his website creations in the upcoming years. CWC meaning his initials, or otherwise pronounced as Quick. In 2000, Chris would turn 18 and the world was introduced to something that would change the face of Christory forever. Once again. For graphic design class, Chris had to make an album cover with the caveat being that he could not use any trademark logos, characters, etc. So to avoid this, he would lazily slap together two of his obsessions, Sonic and Pikachu, creating the accursed Sonichu. Late 2000, Chris graduated high school, losing contact with all his friends and, quote, gal pals, because high school was done. Chris was not pleased. Chris would go to Virginia Community College to study computer design, and around that time he would launch his first Sonichu fansite. This is lost to time. Not much later on, the holy relic, the Sonichu medallion, would be forged from the fires of Mordor and Crayola molding clay. In 2004, Chris would begin, to all our horror, what he would dub the Love Quest, an attempt to find a boyfriend-free girl to be his sweetheart. His words, not mine. He would put signs up around campus advertising like a proto-Craigslist ad that totally did not sound like something that a serial killer would put out. Also around this time, he started putting Sonichu on everything, including his Love Quest stuff, that totally made him look normal. Eventually, this would catch the ire of the dean of students of his college, Mary Lee Walsh, as she would tear them down, saying that she didn't want him soliciting anything like that around campus, believing he was soliciting for sex. Chris was notably upset. Chris would then go on to create the Holy Texts, Sonichu No. 0, his comic book about his original OC. Many Christorians complain about the weird way that he numbers these, but it's best not to think of a reason as to how he does it. It's like trying to explain eldritch knowledge. You're just going to hurt your brain trying. Sonichu's first issue explains how Sonic collides with a Pikachu while fighting the perfect Chaos monster and fuses. Sure. A lot of Sonichu comics deals with things ripped directly from his life, with him as a literal self-insert to stroke his own ego. Example, he talks about getting banned from the mall but once by security, or he calls them jerk-ops, which he called them jerk-ops as a portmanteau on jerk and cops, and how Mary Lee Walsh is a recurring antagonist. Explaining all of Sonichu is insane, so I'm only going to drop Sonichu lore when it's relevant directly to the story at hand, so yeah. July of that year would be an important year for Christory. He would meet someone who has infinite sympathy from me, Megan. He met Megan playing Yu-Gi-Oh! At their local game store, Game Place. Even the game store is an important backdrop for future event. Megan, the most patient person in the world, would become Chris's gal pal. I want to preference gal pal, not girlfriend. As the story goes on, you'll see why I made the distinction. Chris would constantly try to win her over to the point where it would make a good Law & Order SVU episode. On September 11th of that year, never forget. Chris reports in his diary that he was arrested at the mall. He never goes to jail, but is forbidden from going back to the mall. At least not without a parent. September being a bad month for Chris because not even a week later, Chris is suspended from his college for 1 year. He blames Mary Lee Walsh and claims that his parents are writing a letter to then-President George Bush. In 2005, blogger Anna McLaren would write a blog post about Chris, making it possibly the first documented encounter of Chris Chan in the wild online. March of that same year, a woman named Hannah would approach him at the mall and ask him out as a joke, in which Chris found out that it was actually a troll and let out a bellow that would shake the very heavens. in which he was once again kicked out of the mall. 2007 was a big year for Christory. Chris' attempts to get closer to Megan was ramping up as he confessed his love for her, which resulted in Megan's refusal, of course. In February also of that year, Chris would release his infamous Future Message video. His Future Message video was a short manifesto containing a whole lot of weird little information. He also stated that he wanted it to be shown at local schools, and well, to date it hasn't, probably because, you know, Chris. Summer of that year, Chris would enter a Parappa the Rapper contest in hopes to win the grand prize, which was a trip to Seattle, so he can take Megan on a vacation with him. Chris tried to email literally everyone he has ever met to get them to vote for him, and made a ton of fake accounts to vote for himself. August 3rd, the results of the contest were in, and Chris shockingly did not win. A guy named Adam Stackhouse won, and Chris was not pleased. Megan found out about the whole take her to Seattle thing and was not pleased herself. She complained about him touching her and crossing boundaries. Chris would continue his tirade by sending angry, lengthy emails to Sony in which he argues the contest results, stating that Adam cheated despite Chris himself cheating by creating so many fake accounts. Early October, Megan says she's glad Chris backed off his advances. He replies by saying he pines for her. Chris apologized for his hostile, grabby behavior and blames homophobia. Who else but Chris Chan? On October 26, 2007, Chris is officially discovered by Something Awful Forums, introducing the world to Chris Chan. Soon, an Encyclopedia Dramatica page was created for Chris Chan to begin the documentary of Christory. God works in mysterious ways, so when Chris saw this, he was not pleased. This really marks the day that the bulk of the trolling began. Around this time, sonichu fan art starts making its rounds on 4chan, so a guy named Evan collects the best ones to send him. Most of them very, very gay. Chris was not pleased. In a series of lengthy and wild emails, Chris is inspired by this to make a ton of porns of his OCs, including the infamous came for quick.jpg, which it's him fingering an unknown lady drawn in his godforsaken Crayola marker scribbles. This will be important later. Oh my god, I had to see so much researching this. Moving on, Chris gets in contact with a woman named Lori Lopez, thinking his love quest was over, but turned out to be a troll messing with him. This would become a trend. 2008 started slow until we get to March, when it all goes fucking nuclear. Megan discovered that she came for quick.jpg and that it was actually about her. This ended all communications with Chris once and for all, and this will impact all of Christory. In June, Chris gets himself permanently banned from the gameplays, supposedly for constantly hogging the TVs and screaming at children, so the owner Mike Snyder gave him the boot, but that does not mean that this is the last we'll see of Chris's adventures here. In August, Chris begins a quote relationship with a woman named Blanca, who is an obvious troll, even including Blanca in some of his sonichu comics. What a true honor indeed. Later on, Chris ends up dumping Blanca for a woman named Panda. Not even much longer after that, a woman named Julie would come into the picture that Chris would begin to date, while still with Pandahela, mind you, which is funny because the same situation happened with Bianca. Regardless, Julie was not real, and say it with me, Julie was a troll. Julie was actually the brainchild of a group of true asshole trolls. Anyway, apparently Pandahela also died in a fire, so who cares, let's move on.
Oh no! Anyway.
At the end of 2008, the Sonichu Girls Forum would come into existence. Chris, believing it to be an honest, organic forum for his female fans, Chris would go on to write a small introduction letter introducing himself to the forum. He would go on and thank them for basically feeding into his ego and narcissism. He'd even say, "I don't know why I'm single either, even my own mother finds me handsome," which is epic foreshadowing. In January of 2009, Shigeru Miyamoto, yes, that Shigeru Miyamoto, would get in contact with Chris. He would contact him in order to start a kind of like an alpha project for Sonichu, but it wasn't obviously Shigeru Miyamoto, this was the trolls. Chris really never learns his lesson. A trolling group called the Miscreants informed Chris that Julie had been kidnapped, and in response, Chris drove over 400 miles to Cleveland, Ohio to rescue her because he had absolutely no reason to doubt her or the Miscreants about any of this, especially since in reality, the troll behind Julie was a member of the Miscreants. When Chris arrives, the occupants were just as confused as he was. In March of 2009, Chris would give a now infamous tour of his house. This will become important later. March of that year, Julie's fake brother Max gains control of Chris's PSN account, and during that hour-long audio session, threatens to sell the PSN account and forbid Julie from seeing Chris. Chris is coerced into shoving pieces of the Sonichu medallion up his butt before he's allowed to speak to Julie, at which point the other people in the Miscreants find that this has gone a little bit too far, as they kind of out themselves as that the person he's been speaking to that was Julie was actually a member of the Miscreants. Not only was a member of the Miscreants, but was actually a sadistic 13-year-old boy that he's been having basically phone sex with this whole time, going by the name of Blue Spike, who was in cahoots with the Miscreant leader Clyde Cash. Shit like this is why I hate the story. This wouldn't affect Chris for too long because shortly after, Chris would return to his old ways of harassing women in public. This is where his crazy antics would finally pay off and he would meet a real woman named Emily. Chris would take her on a date with his dad, Bob, for some reason. Sure. Suddenly a man in a pickle suit would show up. No, I am not kidding. This actually happened. He later told a troll posing as a friend named Ivy that at this exchange he was, quote, proud that he didn't soil himself when the pickle man appeared. Might be the weirdest sentence I've ever said. BTW, Emily was a troll. Returning home dejected and heartbroken, he was met with a group of hookers sent by Clyde Cash, leader of the Miscreants. They were chased off by his 81-year-old father. He was soon beginning a troll relationship with Ivy, because sure, why not? And then a troll posing as Vanessa Hudgens of High School Musical fame reached out and had e-sex with her. Sure, because then Ivy found out and dumped him. My brain fucking hurts. All this happened within 1 month. What is this? Where am I? In May of that year, Chris Chan is actually mentioned on the Opie and Anthony show. Look up why on your own peril. In July, Chris uploads Rollin' and Trollin', where he gives a tour of Quickville and claims that the autistic man-child we thought we knew what never existed. Soon after, a man would start uploading videos claiming to be the real Chris Chandler, which fans would then dub Liquid Chris, and not only would he be the creator of Sonichu, but that he made a significant amount of money off the prop of it as well. Chris would take this pretty well. This would start a large online, mostly one-sided feud between the two, usually ending up with Liquid Chris giving a masterclass in trolling and Solid Chris generally just freaking out. Final showdown was in a SingStar competition, which is like a karaoke contest, I guess, which the winner would be dubbed the real Chris. Liquid won the competition. Solid Chris was not pleased.
You kicked me in the balls again!
After losing the contest like a true sore loser, Chris Chan said that the contest was never to determine who was who, but it was just for fun. August, we get a video where Chris is yelling about his normal spazzy issues when there's a sudden cut. An uncut version will show his dad come in and telling him he's mad because he showed their house in an earlier video that he took back in March that I mentioned, and their house is so bad that the city could possibly come in and condemn it and they would end up homeless just because of Chris. End of August, Liquid would announce that he was departing YouTube to pursue making Sonichu an acclaimed media franchise. See you later, Space Cowboy. Hearing this news, Chris was not pleased. Sometime after, Chris begins randomly hating on people with Asperger's with the unbridled passion of 1,000 suns. And almost on cue, trolls begin making comic book trolling Sonichu, Asperchu, and Asperger equivalent version of Sonichu. 9 would round off with his wiki page being flooded with gay ads purchased by the trolls, and Chris having a batshit meltdown saying he would send letters to President Barack Obama requesting to make gay ads illegal. In January 2010, Chris ends up seemingly in a real relationship with someone going by the Wallflower, only to accidentally dox them in March, in which she dumped him for, obviously. In April, Chris would start another quote-unquote relationship with another troll named Jackie. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 42,387 times, shame on Chris. He would then try to return to the game store and try to get unbanned, in which the owner, fully within his rights, told Chris no, and which Chris very politely replied with an anti-Semitic slur. In June that year, Chris returned to the Holy Land once more, to Chris's words, take a picture of Michael Snyder to make a dartboard. When Snyder saw Chris with his Nintendo DS taking pictures, Snyder saw him taking pictures of him and his daughter and called the cops after he tried to run him over. The cops had to listen to Chris rant about the trolls for a while, and after having their brains melted, the cops just sent him home and Chris didn't tell his mom. In September, Jackie tricked Chris to do a cosplay as Mr. Popo from Dragon Ball Z, and yes, he did do blackface, and no, I am not showing it. Chris really would do almost anything that the trolls tell him to do, but Jackie eventually sends him a very serious, real, scathing email that actually seems to hit him to the core, and Chris announces that he's leaving the internet. Silence for some time until March 2011, when he emails Jackie saying he has become a quote-unquote Tom girl. The saga has begun. April of 2011, pictures begin to surface of Chris with his new lifestyle. Seeing a new opportunity, the trolls would create a Tomboy and Tomgirls of Virginia forum just to mess with him, and Jackie would tell him of it. Meanwhile, Barb and Bob were not that supportive, with Bob saying that he didn't raise no daughter, and Barb dropping the F slur at one point. Chris and Jackie hold a back and forth troll and Mark relationship, and nothing of major note happens until September, in which Bob passes away 2 days after his 84th birthday to heart failure. The only other thing of note to happen in September was a drawing of Sonichu is posted in a kid's comic book in thousands of newspapers, making Sonichu technically a finally published work, funnily enough crediting a 9-year-old Chris. In October, Chris got himself and his mother Barb arrested after getting into a fist fight at the Sacred Game Store with the owner, Mike Snyder. You don't mess with Game of Rage. He then would go ahead and write fake reviews on Google, calling Snyder a
cheese pizza lover.
On the 4th of April 2012, it finally happened. The love quest was complete. Chris had lost his virginity to a hooker that he found on Craigslist or Backpage. it still counts. Outside of Chris setting up a random lemonade stand in honor of his father and being arraigned, nothing really else of note happened in 2012. 2013 is also considered a slow year and is considered the Dark Ages by many historians. However, 2014 kind of starts out with a bang where the Chandler household caught fucking fire.
Boom, it's the humanity!
No, that's...
Probably considering the state of the house hasn't improved since the tour that Chris gave years prior. In August of that year, Chris would come out as a lesbian-identifying male and begin attending LGBT events around Charlotte, which is progress for him from his days of wanting to cure homosexuality and his fear of pickles. He even ended up having a partner who, after some time, came out to be, say it with me, turned out to be a troll. Chris just that year realized that he could actually sell things, so you can now purchase a Sonichu medallion, but purchase one at your own peril. That year also saw the release of Sonic Boom, the video game and the TV series, in which Chris was definitely not pleased. He wanted people to riot and boycott over the fact that Sonic's arms and legs were blue, not tan. This would lead to the infamous, I'm tired of saying infamous, GameStop incident, where he was recorded pepper spraying an innocent employee, in which Chris was arrested. In January, the Temple of Chandler was repaired from the fire and Chris could move back home. The rest of the year is fairly uneventful or not well documented, except for going to some cons and showing up at a couple drag shows. In May, it is believed that Chris began hormone replacement to begin transitioning. Chris then goes through court and winds up guilty for the GameStop incident and is fined $541 and gets 180 days probation. 2016 is where shit is going to start getting real fucking dark, so please be warned. In that summer, Chris officially changed her name to Christine, whom I will just shorten to Chris for convenience's sake. Chris had also began making videos begging for money in which Barb would have beginning appear to help them pander a little bit better as they were in a significant amount of financial trouble. July, after failing to start up a career as an escort, Chris decided that they needed to stab themselves in the perineum, thinking that they would be able to grow a vagina from it after watching hypnosis videos. After this, Kiwi Farms members begged Chris to go see medical attention, in which they finally did. We'll round up the summer with Chris defending incest on Facebook, with Chris admitting that he fantasized about incest with his mother. Oh, it would also come out that all the money that they got from begging and pandering just ended up going to video games and toys, not the massive debt that the family had. 2017 was weird but uneventful. Chris continued Sonichu, continued to beg and pander for money for his, quote, family. He went to BronyCon and he unearthed the sacred relic in an attempt to sell it to like a museum or the black markets or something. However, in November of that year, Chris was introduced to a game that would change all of Christory once again. A game called Hyperdimension Neptunia. A group of trolls called the Idea Guys emailed Chris pretending to be a character from said game, asking about his old Sega Dreamcast, saying it held a portal to Quickville where Sonichu had lived, and of course, Chris fucking believed it. Chris believed it so much it was like flipping a switch and it became his new obsession. Chris believed the other dimension housed all fictional properties, everything from Family Guy to My Little Pony to, and of course, Sonichu, and that Chris was the one to connect them all, basically being a messiah of sorts. After hearing a rumor of a panel dedicated to him at MagFest, Chris would travel to MagFest in March of 2018. Not only was Chris correct, but they would also receive a surprisingly warm welcome. Around this time, Chris declared the love quest complete as he joined a polyamorous marriage between his fictional characters Magician and Crizel Rosachu, his made-up OC characters that only he could see because he's the messiah, remember? God, I hate this. In June, Chris would go to Too Many Games, but was thrown out for touching attendees inappropriately, but of course not before making a scene and going into a defensive hedgehog state. The more things changed, the more things stayed the same. The hyperdimension trolling got so bad that even the owner of Kiwi Farms, Null, would come out and expose the Idea Guys on how bad it was. He would come out and show that the Idea Guys' treatment of Chris was that they extorted almost $6,000 in gifts and donations from Chris. Despite having the trolls outed as malicious trolls, the damage was done and Chris still believed in everything that they had already said. October rolled around and announcements of a video and a series of tweets about a dimensional merger where our universe and his imaginary one would collide into each other. Chris would also try to rope Megan back into all this nonsense, saying that she was one of the goddesses of this new world. Seriously, she can't catch a break. Chris even tried reaching out to her, but was told to never contact her ever again, and that she's packing heat. And in 2018, Chris, desperate for the merger to happen, probably so they don't have to pay all that debt they've been sued for, starts hanging out with a group of kids, who are really just giant enablers who are just encouraging Chris's behavior to make everything worse. 2019 would go mostly uneventful, except for Chris getting his very own obsessive fan, going by Jacob Sockness, a fellow autistic man who thinks his magic powers and is possessed by the god of war and death and cosplays as Chris. No biggie. Also seems to not actually be a troll and seems to be serious, which is concerning. Moving on. The year is 2020 and the lockdown has gone into effect, which means the worst thing has happened to our hero. Chris cannot go to the Bay Area Brony Spectacular. God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. Chris would meet up with a new group of enablers called the Praetors, in which they would make merch and help commercialize his stuff with Chris getting a cut. In October, we would be introduced into Isabella Janke, who, holy shit, fuck Isabella Janke. Chris would ask Isabella to make an animated intro for them and to be like a security guard against Jacob Sockness. 2021 would roll around and still no dimensional merge. Chris would talk to Isabella more frequently, and it turned out that she was planning on manipulating him to kill himself. Seriously, fuck Isabella Janky. That summer in a call with Isabella, Chris would begin talking about a new honey that was actually real in this world, and unlike his imaginary wife Magic-chan, is actually real. Unfortunately for everyone listening to me, and for everyone who has heard it before as it developed, in an leaked audio call with Isabella Janky that it was in fact Chris's mother. Chris was soon removed from his own house by social services. Chris would be arrested by cops. Jerk-ops.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
At a motel, they got way more than they bargained for. After some time in prison awaiting trial, Chris would send letters to one of the people who defended him from the idea guys and declared himself literal Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. After Chris's arrest, political commentator and chocolate candy fetishist Tucker Carlson talks about Chris Chan and spreads misinformation about transgenderism. In February of 2022, Chris was deemed too quirked up to stand trial and was sent to Western State Hospital. In August of that year, significant legal proceedings to Chris's incest charges would take place. His lawyer, David Heilberg, filed for an autism disorder deferred disposition, potentially meaning further court proceedings could be deferred and Chris could be put on probation terms for it set by the court. Later in the month, Kiwi Farms goes down and news goes out that Chris Chan has escaped and was spotted fleeing the country with notorious criminal Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Oh god, I hope he doesn't silence his victims first. Run, Barb, run! Then it's debunked almost immediately. Even USA Today chimes in and said, no, try again. 2023 rolls around and Chris celebrates their 41st birthday behind bars. In March, the goddess was freed.
No. Wait.
After 2 whole years, Chris makes her first public appearance at a Walmart and at a new Holy Game store playing Magic the Gathering. Hopefully not repeating the same behaviors as they did with Megan and Mike Snyder. At this point, Chris was less of a celebrity and more of the Ruckersville cryptid. One witness of Chris in the wild was a Reddit user going by the name of Sage Haze, was a worker at a store Chris made a purchase at, and said they smelled really bad. They said, quote, it was definitely funky with a hint of shit. Also, Chris signed their receipt as Jesus Christ Chan Sonichu. That mental facility did wonders. In August, Chris's incest charges are dismissed because there is no justice in this world. September is a fairly big month as Chris's car is spotted at Barb's house and Chris is spotted with an unknown woman, later identified as Flutter, a girl who reached out to him in prison and despite her appearance is actually 30. It's unknown if she's actually a troll or just playing the long game, but she stuck around with him for a very, very long time and she's actually still with him. In October, Chris uploads to their YouTube channel Jesus Christ Chan Sonichu Prime Resurrected and Returned. And it's as loony as it sounds. Chris sings a couple of Pokemon parody songs based around their new religion now and it's just wacky. At the end, Chris shows their hands, trying to show off their stigmata to the audience, and of course, no one can see it. That same month, Chris would put out another video called Setting the Record Straight. There was never any sex involving me in 2021. This is a video of Chris telling his side of the story from the incest arc. However, Chris is a habitual liar, so it is very difficult to tell whether or not he is telling the truth. He claims that Isabella framed him, but how do you frame someone when you are literally spewing your guts out on a telephone call? Chris also goes on to, incorrectly, state that he was found innocent. Chris's charges were dismissed because of the autism deferment disposition. Chris was not acquitted by a jury. Also, for one last time, fuck Isabella Janky. In January 2024, Chris would be interviewed by the controversial Keffels, a person whom I have a lot of opinions on, but that's not relevant here. In the same month, Chris would go and get banned from the con anime right Raleigh. It's not clear why, but it's hinted it may have to do with Chris's new Messiah complex attitude. Soon after, Chris was also banned from BabsCon as well, based on previous actions at events and other cons. Chris's response was so hilarious and egotistical and Messiah complexy that the con actually framed their response. In April, Chris would go with Flutter to Finland. Who the fuck gave Chris Chan a passport? In August, Chris would be awarded the silver play button for passing a 100k sub milestone on YouTube. It might just be the first time Chris has ever won an award. In the same month, the body cam footage of Chris's arrest would also be posted to YouTube. In November, everyone thought the world was ending, or the merger was happening, or the third impact had happened, as Chris revealed that Flutter was pregnant.
When the child is actually coming into play, or somewhere around that point. Or I just might keep y'all in the dark and let y'all know it wait till after the child is born.
But soon it was cleared up as they just misspoke, thank God. Which catches up to modern day 2025 as the only thing of note to happen as of current was current WWE champion Cody Rhodes accidentally name dropped Chris Chan by accident.